We good? Okay. I appreciate the opportunity to come back and talk with you guys. It's been a couple years since I've been able to make it. I enjoy coming down here. It's a good time. I spent 8 years in North Carolina, so when I can make it down back to the southeast, it's kind of nice. I catch a little cheer wine. I don't know if anyone likes cheer wine or not, but in North Carolina, Salisbury, western part of the state, cheer wine. Yeah, so I always load up on that. So I got my cheer wine last night, and I got my Bojangles, so I'm doing all right. No Bojangles in Indiana. In fact, I was telling Nicole earlier, we were supposed to get into Salisbury last night at 7:30, a colleague and I, Bob Nielsen, the corn guy, and our flight was canceled, and we're supposed to go through Philadelphia. And I was like, oh, great. Well, I think crop management's SOL here. And then they rebooked us in through Charlotte, so it worked out well because Charlotte, I got Bojangles. Philadelphia, I went and got my Bojangles. So I like to have a conversation, guys, so please, ask questions. I have way more slides than I've got 15 minutes to talk through. Sulfur on soybeans, if you'd asked me a few years ago about this, I'd say no, don't worry about it. In fact, in the 8 years I was in North Carolina, we would see it from time to time pop up. I spent a couple years between my master's and PhD working in the North Carolina Department of Ag, agronomic division, and we'd see it pop up from time to time. But it's been popping up more and more in the Midwest and more in Indiana. And so when you guys think about sulfur deficiencies, regardless if it's soybeans or wheat or corn or something else, what kind of field conditions do you guys normally think of? Sand, coarse texture. Why do you say that, Tom?
No organic matter.
Low organic matter. Okay. What else? Yeah.
High yields.
High yields. Okay. And continue down that thought process. Why high yields?
You need a lot of resources if you're going to drive really high yields.
Okay. All right. So just flat out foundational, pushing it forward, and there's removal rates. There's needs there, right? Okay. How many deal with sulfur deficiencies on a day-to-day basis? Am I preaching to the choir, basically? Do you guys deal with sulfur deficiencies?
Yes.
You got it all nailed? No? Okay. So if you deal with it, what are some of the frustrations then, so I can kind of move this talk to what might be in your needs? So you deal with it. Is there anything that's really frustrating with you guys in sulfur?
It leaches so bad, but you can't put it out early.
Right. There's no fall applications, right? There's really not a place that you can put it. We think about a lot of RP and K up in the Midwest. We've got a decent split between those that are doing fall and those that are doing spring. And so a question I get asked, can we just go and put it out in the fall? You can. Are you going to get the use for it is another story, right? Why would soybeans normally not be on your list for a sulfur response? Or maybe a different way to put this is, why would corn or wheat be on your list for a sulfur response? What's the other macronutrient that you guys apply to those crops in particular? Nitrogen, right? And you can get in a huge imbalance, okay? So let's get into this a little bit. So I've had the opportunity to look at some old soybeans to new, and so out of this was kind of a fun deal that these are just 4 of the 60 varieties we looked at from the old to new, and I just put the years that they were released on there to give an idea of how these varieties have changed. As you look at this, what strikes you about these 4 varieties? Darker green, less viney, so less lodging, right? Okay. So there's some breeding advancements that come into play. As you go through the course of the decades, right, you would anticipate yields were increasing as well, right? So there's disease that's coming in there, lodging, standability basically. That chlorophyll content, I'll go ahead and, it's nitrogen, it's chlorophyll, and it is sulfur. Early on, when I was looking at these results, it was just, we partitioned these things down, V4, R2, R4, and R6, and nitrogen, that's what we were all playing with. And then when we were starting to see the sulfur pop, so I need to go back and look at that a little closer. And so we're seeing a lot of that. So here's just a case of looking at the 1960s versus the 2010s and how the sulfur has changed. In other words, how does the uptake and remobilization change? So I've got 3 varieties just as an example. 3 varieties that are in the background of the 1960s on the left, and 3 in the 2010s or the modern ones on the right. And so one of the things I really want to stress to you guys is as you look at the orange dotted line here, that's going to be the pod seed fill, okay? So as you get to the point of the 1960s, Hanoi and Weber, nice publication on soybean growth and development. You look at nutrient accumulations and how they change. And, you know, that was the Bible for decades, right? And even an update from Iowa State in 2009 on that, but it's still the same cultivars, late 1960 cultivars. And so as you go in the point of R6, we've accumulated maybe 45, 50% of the sulfur, and then it just starts to peter out to 60%. What do you notice about the modern lines? This thing will advance for me. There we go. By R6, maybe 35, 40% of our sulfur is accumulated in those pods and seeds. And then is it kind of going on vacation yet? No, it's keeping on. So in terms of your modern lines, okay, this might be a good step back. Indeterminate, you guys catching determinants? Where are you guys in that transition? I know this is kind of an area that soybeans, you can go back and forth. What kind of soybeans are you truly growing? Indeterminates. I thought you guys had made that transition. I just want to make sure. So this is speaking to your language then. So indeterminates is what I'm talking about here. And so this transition now from R6 to R8, going from 35% sulfur all the way up to 75, 80%, going into the pods and seeds. A lot's going on later in the season is what I'm driving at. Okay? Just one of the main points with these varieties and how they've changed. Could get to your comment, sir, about yield potential. Could get to the comment about just how they take up the nutrient and transition. Okay? As we get into the sulfur cycle, so it's always nice to kind of say, where is this coming from? If you're really familiar with the nitrogen cycle, there's going to be some pretty good similarities to the sulfur. Okay? So deposition, all right, what are we getting from the atmosphere? Okay? Organic supply, so that mineralization, you talked about low organic matter, coarse texture soils. Okay, it's getting that. You don't have the supply coming from that soil, so then you might think about needing some sulfur in that. Plant residue, that breakdown. All right. Immobilization, ringing a bell with any nitrogen cover crop type work? No? You guys don't have immobilization issues? Come up to the Midwest, help us out then, okay? You know, so that idea of immobilization with nitrogen, guess what? It's happening with sulfur too, guys. Okay? So put some of those in context. I'll come back to these points throughout some of the research studies as I go on. And then just to kind of have that analogy, that parallel with nitrogen, okay, organic matter, yeah, that's a major pool, okay? I grew up in Illinois. All right, don't throw anything yet. I grew up on flat blacks just like your table, okay? I grew up on 4% prairie soil, okay? And when I spent 8 years in North Carolina, they just kept on wanting to just kick me off the farm like, you don't know how to farm. Why are you consulting me? You throw it out there and you just get it. Guess what? We're seeing sulfur response on the flat blacks too. 4%. It's crazy, okay? Not every situation. So I kind of want to, again, try to piece some of this together. Organic matter, all right, how does nitrogen and sulfur become available through mineralization? How does it become available? You don't need to go down to the specific microbes. You can back up a little bit. I can go higher level. I'm just a dumb soybean guy. It's going to be a long 50 minutes, guys. Microbes have to break it down, right? How do they break it down? Is there temperatures? Is there moisture that comes into play? Okay. Here's the softball pitch, guys. Come on, let's hit this one out. All right. Is mineralization, is nitrogen supply, is it going to be higher or lower in cool, wet conditions? Lower, right? So when you think about a corn or a wheat, let's go with a wheat. You're top dressing wheat. When do you guys typically top dressing wheat? And if you don't know it, fake it. When are you typically top dressing wheat? Green up, February, March, right? Something like that. Is it cool and wet then? You betcha. Even down here, okay? And so that's why wheat itself, it's a grass crop. It's going to respond to sulfur and the soil supply, okay? Now, what are we as agronomists telling you on the soybeans? A major place to gain yield. Earlier planting. Start to think about that one now. Cooler, wet conditions. Hopefully I can get to my tail slides that hit those very points. Okay? Mineralization. Plant residue, that breakdown. How much carbon content is in there? Okay? In the corn residue, or if you got cover crops or whatever it is, that's coming into play. Was that a question?
Yeah, so you've got the same problem with the sulfur becoming available as you do phosphorus.
In what way?
It's got to warm up before the microbes can release fixed phosphorus. And if you're saying you got fixed sulfur,
It's tied up in the organic matter, right? So I like to have more of the analogy with the nitrogen and the phosphorus, but it's microbial breakdown from whether it's soil organic matter, that fraction, or even the plant residue. Okay? Yeah, you have warm up that's kinetics for the microbes. Okay? That makes sense? All right. Fixation, obviously, that comes into play. This is one that's going to really shine when we talk about sulfur in soybeans. Okay? A cofactor for nodulation and fixation. What nutrient's a cofactor? Hint, what's the title of this talk? Sulfur. We normally think about it, there's an iron complex, there's some moly in there, right? We think about those things, but we forget about the sulfur side of it. And I think that's some other areas where we're gaining a decent hold on this sulfur application. Some of that sulfur is just straight plant nutrition, and some of that sulfur is straight nodulation efficiency, which is therefore affecting your nitrogen. Okay? You catch the subtle differences with that? It's still a sulfur effect, but it's affecting different components of the plant or that microbial symbiotic relationship. Okay? So, those come in together for those high yielding beans. If you're short on nitrogen on soybeans, you are short on yield. Flat out. Flat out. Okay? Do you guys ever deal with drought? Do you ever deal with flooding? Right? I was just talking to the gentleman right here. He's talking about both already in 2 minutes. Guess what process is hit first in soybeans under both those extremes? Nodulation, fixation. What is a nodule? It's just a root hair. I'm going basic physiology. I haven't gotten into any talk yet. A nodule is just a root hair that the bacteria has caused to malform on itself. If you have anything that's affecting root development, root hair development, drought conditions, waterlogged soils, nodulation is affected. That's because it's affecting root hairs, and then it's also affecting the nodule and the bacteria itself. Okay? That was extra. All right. So it's nothing new that we need nodulation. Here's a picture from the 1920s, even black and white. This Urbana culture, this was the Brady rhizobium that they found in Urbana, Illinois. And then they inoculated the seed, and you can even see in the black and white, okay, the plants on the right, darker gray, right, versus the ones on the left, probably dropping their leaves. So if you were to do color vision with that technicolor, right, what color would you put on the right? Green, right? Yellow on the left. All right. So here's when it starts really hitting home. We have Clean Air Act comes into play. We're looking at sulfur emissions. And so back in 1990, we have that Clean Air Act that's really going after sulfur. Got a lot of coal going on here, right? A lot of coal production industry. So you think about deposition back in 2001, we're upwards of 15, 20 pounds of sulfur. Okay. Now, 2015 and beyond, maybe 3 to 5 pounds. Okay. So we're not getting the free sulfur like we used to. We're not having to repaint our trucks every 3 years because of acid rain, but we're not getting the free sulfur. And so, again, I've already kind of alluded to which crops are going to be the responsive ones. Corn and wheat, yeah, those are always on my list. Wheat's at the top of my list. We talked about mineralization. You talk about the grass crops. They just need it. And it's also used for efficiency and nitrogen uptake. Sulfur is needed for soybeans, and that's what we're getting into. Here's a slide that's a good set of just rules of thumb as you work through this. Okay, so there's probably about 6 bullets, so if you want a picture, wait till the end. So for about each percent organic matter, we mineralize maybe 3 to 5 pounds of sulfur per acre per year, and that's probably even a little generous. Okay, but that's just those ballparks for you. That's over the course of a year, not a growing season, not the month of May, not the month of June, the growing season, okay? So, plant residue, is it mineralized or immobilized? This is going back to some of the comments I made about carbon to sulfur, carbon to nitrogen ratios. You probably have some numbers in the back of your mind with the carbon to nitrogen and say, okay, we're immobilizing type conditions. We have a high carbon content, you know, CRI 40 to 1 or something like that. Well, guess what? You have the same kind of things on the sulfur. So again, these are ballparks. They're not absolutes, but they get you close. So if you really wanted to start to see if you're seeing some of these issues, even taking some of the residues, take them, send them to the waters or whatever lab you guys have. Carbon to sulfur ratio, if it's less than 200 to 1, that residue will be mineralized. That sulfur will become available. All right. It'll be the sulfate form, which you hate, Leslie, because it just leaches, right? Yeah. But it is becoming available. So the big thing is, do you have the crop there to take it up? Or do you have that soil, BT horizon about 18 inches to at least accumulate? Some of the coastal plains of North Carolina, we have a little bit of accumulation. I assume you have some soils like that, a little bit on your coastal plains. I don't know all your soils, but again, I can tiptoe in here because I spent 8 years in North Carolina, and I did say in a Holiday Inn. So that was a joke. Carbon to sulfur ratio, over 400 to 1. All right, when we're in that area, we are immobilizing sulfur. Okay, it is being tied up. It is not available for that following crop. Okay, so it is going to take time for that to become available. So it's tying up what's in the residue, and it's probably starting to tie up some in the soil as well. Okay, as a frame of reference here, if you want that snapshot, here you go. Corn stover, again, roughly 350 to 1. Type of residue we've got. Soybean stover, much less, right? Okay. Corn's got a high carbon content. Makes sense, guys, right? Wheat, it's up there too. You know, these are going to change a little bit based on yield level, your fertility, some of those. But again, these are nice ballparks. I have not dared go into cover crops on this, but I guarantee we've got those going on too. You know, the easy one would be a cereal rye versus something that's legume base or something like that, right? Make sense? Okay. So again, I'm setting up these situations where you might have a sulfur response, whether it's corn or soybeans for that matter, or any other crop, the supply of that sulfur. How much does that other crop? Always not corn. I'm in the Midwest, so I've got to hit corn pretty good. You know, on grain removal, we're 180 to 220 bushel corn, 14 to 18 pounds of sulfur being removed. Okay, just kind of nice to start doing a mass balance. How much is coming from the sky, how much is coming from the soil, what's being removed by that other crop, and then going on. Soybeans, how much do they need? So if we're going to 50 bushel, I just picked some yield levels, 50, 7,500. If we're at 50, 75 bushel beans, in the grain alone, okay, we're 9 to 14 pounds of sulfur. Okay, yes, sir?
Okay, now that's taking sulfur off the field.
On
How
the-
much sulfur do you need to grow the crop?
I'll give you your $5 later. That's the next slide, or next point. You're good. Actually, Nicole will give you the $5. I'm just from Purdue. I don't have any money here. My Yankee money doesn't work around these parts. So sulfur. But yeah, I'm getting to that point. If you notice one thing about it, on a per bushel basis, it's twice as much as corn. I'll go back so you can catch that. 0.08 on corn, 0.18, more than double in soybean, okay? Think about why. Why do we grow soybeans? Is there any chickens produced in this state or anywhere near it? Just a few. High protein content, right? High protein, high nitrogen, high sulfur, right? That kind of makes sense. 9 to 14 removed in the grain. To your point, how much is in the overall crop? You basically double that number. So on a per bushel basis, these are some pretty good numbers. 0.35 pounds of sulfur per bushel for the grain plus the stover by the time you get to the end of the season. Okay, so a 50 bushel crop needs 18 pounds or so. 75 goes to 26, and then again, you talk about your high yields, sir, getting up to 35 pounds. And it's got to come from somewhere. All right, you're only getting 5 pounds, 4 pounds from the atmosphere. You got some organic matter. Now, the trouble with doing some of the mass balance in the back of the envelope calculations is, okay, are you just looking at that 0 to 6, 0 to 8 inch soil slice, or are you thinking about what's down deeper? And so it's kind of hard to get the full picture unless you've got that profile, but these get you close, okay? So here is that back of the envelope. If we run a 1, 2, 3, 4% organic matter type soil, we're going to just say, okay, let's get that sulfur mineralized over the course of the year. I've put the soybean yields 50, 7,500 off to the left. How much is needed? 18, 26, 35. Those numbers should look familiar. How much is coming from the sky? I'll be generous, 5 pounds. So if we're looking at a 50 bushel crop, needs 18, 5 pounds is coming from the sky. I'm making the assumption it comes all when the growing season's there. 4 pounds or so is coming from that 1% organic matter. I'm still short 9 pounds. Back of envelope calculations, guys, right? If I want to be running 75 bushels, and most people are like, I at least want to have that kind of a yield goal, I might be short 13 pounds, right? So this kind of does change. Yeah?
Okay, now the amount you're short.
Potentially short, I'll put it that way.
Okay, potentially short, and you want to make an amendment to the soil, how do you interpret what that root system is able to intercept and take versus what's there?
Yep.
What's put there?
Yeah, so the question is about the how. Okay, I'm just doing a lot of lead into how do we actually do this and what's the best method and the root system, so the nutrient uptake. I'm going to have that come in, the answer come into the slides to follow, okay? So here's a case of where we're starting to see it. A lot of what I'm going to talk about today is what is from our sulfur deficient site. A lot of things just happen by accident. And I stumbled across this one a number of years ago. We had 20 inches of rain in June, all right? 20 inches of rain in June, and as a coarse textured field, loamy sand, sandy loam. We weren't ponded, but they were struggling. What can we do to bring them back to life? And one of my many treatments that I put out there was a sulfur-based treatment, and it went from there. And so now we've identified sulfur-deficient fields, literally sulfur-deficient, versus those that are situationally deficient. Okay, those that are high carbon content residue, early plantings, even 4% organic matters, right? That's situationally deficient. And then we've got literally sulfur-deficient fields. And so we would see a number of these fields that look like the one on the left, whole field looked like that. I didn't think much of it until you've got more or less a reference strip out there, right? I'm going to try to read between the lines a little bit with your question, sir. Is there a soil test for sulfur? Yes, no. You can get sulfur numbers, right? What do they mean? And there's some correlations out there, not great, nothing like doing a Malic 3P or something like that. But they're not really the best, so the road I really drive is using the plant as the indicator or the integrator and having that reference strip out there. So in this case, we had no sulfur, 20 pounds of sulfur up front, so this is getting to source in the wind. I want to be as close to planting as possible. All right, so this is 20 pounds of sulfur applied within 2 or 3 days of planting. The bigger window I really have, if it's within 3 weeks of planting, 3 to 4 weeks, we're probably okay. Again, because I'm marching with that rainfalls and everything else, okay? This happened to be ammonium sulfate as a source. And so let's get into some data. Let's get into some, what are the recommendations that are starting to come out with these sulfur deficient fields. So back in 2016 is when I really started getting on these sulfur ones. So in 16 and 17, I just took a shotgun. We have a lot of different things going on with those early years, and then now we're getting into the fine tuning. Okay, what's the source? What's the rate? We're into starters now. We're into foliars. Okay, so if you have any of those questions that are that specific, I probably have an answer if I don't get to it in today's talk. Shotgun approach. So with the shotgun approach, we are hitting obviously untreated, broadcast. 20 pounds of sulfur was my starting point. Okay, 20 pounds of sulfur. Where'd you come up with that? Back of the envelope again, right? I need 75 bushel beans, got a little bit from the atmosphere, a little bit organic matter. Okay, 20 pounds is probably enough, but not too much, okay? This field these fields I'm talking about, there are black sands, what I call them. They're about 2.5% organic matter. So still a little higher organic matter than you might anticipate seeing a sulfur response, okay? When you say low organic matter, what kind of numbers are you saying, sir? 1, right. So this soil, again, it's a loamy sand, sandy loam, very responsive. 20 pounds of sulfur was a starting point. Ammonium sulfate was a source. We also did MES-10, Micro Essentials product, 1240 O10S. All right, ammonium sulfate, when you have water, when's that sulfur available? You have rainfall working in, immediately, right? More or less, as soon as it gets in the soil. Mez 10, at 10% sulfur. What's that source? Half is ammonium sulfate. The other half is elemental sulfur. Okay? So elemental sulfur takes time to oxidize and to become available. Okay? So the thought process is that organic elemental sulfur oxidize, and become available later in the season, so it might be there for that plant need versus the other half that was leached through the system. All right? You know, we get 4-inch rains in a matter of a week or two, like you guys do, and so some of that could come into play. So again, shotgun. I'll get into 10 different sources in the later years. Single foliar, 12, 40, O, 10S. I use their Mez 10, not their Mez with zinc. But yeah, there's about 2 or 3 different formulations. Mez actually, Micro Essentials has a 15% sulfur version as well. I'm not sure if they promote that down here or not. Single foliar, so basically can we correct for this sulfur deficiency in season? 5 pounds of sulfur, I use spray grade AMS. We shot for V4, R2, R4, R6 with these single applications. I do color coding too to make life easier for you when the data slides come up. So 5 pounds of sulfur. Any idea how many pounds of spray grade AMS that is? There, okay, good. At least I got a laugh out of there. Is it a hot mix? Do you think it might be a hot mix? Yeah, that's 21 pounds of product, guys. That's a hot freaking mix, okay? Some of those products that are called multi-nutrient comes out 1-2 quart products, right? You guys probably saw them everyone. You know, how much sulfur are you getting with those guys? At best, a half a pound of sulfur. Okay? Now, I'm not saying that's the end. That's just where I started, guys. That is a hot mix. I'll go ahead and, full disclosure, at R6 and R4, we got tattooed. We got burned. Okay? But at V4, R2, nothing. Temperatures, leaf exposure, younger leaves, all that comes into play. Okay? We did some sequentials. All this is nutrient solutions alone, nothing tank mix, but with the idea that it could be going across the same field. V4 plus R2 to get you to 10 pounds of sulfur. V4 and R4, thinking about a post-emergent application of herbicide and an R4 fungicide, those kind of things. Or just spoon feeding all season long. 5, 5, 5, 5 to get you to 20 pounds. All right, shotgun, literally. Okay.
Is there actual leaf uptake of the phosphorus? Or is it all
Say it again.
Is there actual leaf uptake of phosphorus, or is it drip on the ground and go through the
The phosphorus or the sulfur?
sulfur? I'm sorry.
Yes, there's uptake. There's both. There's both.
All right.
Well, I'll show you some pictures of it. Okay. So here's applications early on. R3, most recent mature leaf samples. Critical levels for sulfur in soybeans, 0.25%. Okay, so that 0.25% is right there. By strictest definition, am I deficient in any treatment? By strictest definition, no. How many take leaf samples? Corn, soybeans, it don't matter. Okay. How do you use that to manage the in-season crop? Do you make adjustments with it? Yeah. If you show deficiencies. Have anyone ever had tissue samples results that are kind of squirrely?
Yes.
Exactly, right? So you take it at 2 o'clock in the afternoon when the stomates are closing down, your potassium numbers are all off, right? You know, those kind of things happen. So they're a grain of salt. Use them to kind of general guidelines. The approach I have with this is it gets you close. If you're getting the close critical levels, again, I'm showing research, but also think about the management side of that. You're getting close to that level, you probably have a responsive site, okay? And that's going to change based on, okay, this is at R3. What growth stage is that? First what? Jake, I'm coming back for a soybean physiology talk next year. First what? Pod, right? So first pod, 3/16 inch, right? All right, so you got those untreated control, 0.27, but you look at your broadcast up front, Mez 10, AMS, well insufficiencies. Any of the foliar treatments, V4, R2, they look great. The sequentials look great. we don't have the other ones because, we just haven't done those applications yet. This is earlier on in the season, but it gives you an idea. So that gets you close. A number that I was given when I worked at the NCDA down in North Carolina for a couple of years was 20-to-1 on this nitrogen to sulfur ratio. That's one, okay, if you're getting close to that, you're probably inducing a sulfur deficiency, or flip it, you're going to be more responsive to a sulfur application. More times than not, we're using that for corn and wheat. The numbers I've been getting, in today's example I'll show you, it gets closer to 18-to-1. Okay? As we get closer to an 18-to-1, we have a field that's going to be responsive to sulfur. Okay? So untreated control is right there, literally at 18-to-1. I might argue, I don't want to do it today, but you might argue that it probably might be a little skosh lower than that even. But 18-to-1 is what I feel comfortable with saying right now, is if you get to close to an 18-to-1 ratio in your leaf sample, you probably have a field that's responsive to sulfur when you talk soybeans. Everything else is within what I like to be, within that 14 to 16 range, okay? So there's a nice balance, okay? So nitrogen to sulfur, it is a balance, it's a ratio, okay, for the way the plant uses that nitrogen, okay? Guess what? Sulfur also helps with uptake and the ability and efficiency to use some of the other nutrients, okay? We have issues with some of the micronutrients, manganese in particular. It actually helps with that uptake and that overall plant health. I'm not showing that data today. So if you have those kind of issues, this is another one that plays in with that. Yield responses were crazy. I'm going to admit, when I see a 10, 12 bushel yield response, I normally say BS, right? Or is it a planting date study? I mean, these are huge responses. But for years, we've been getting these same responses. We go from 48 to 60 bushel beans in the 2016 season. Someone might say, well, those are low yielding beans. Of course they're that low. 2017, we're around 60, 70 bushel beans, same kind of thing. 10 to 12 bushel responses on a sulfur deficient field. Okay. By far, with the shotgun approach, the broadcast up front as close to planting was the winner, right? Yield, as well as you think about profitability. What was interesting was there is some correction that could be done with these foliars. So the blues, the singles, the pink or purple are kind of these sequentials. We were able to correct a little bit. In one case, V4 plus R2, we even got to the same level, okay, same level as our broadcast up front. In 2017, we were kind of mixed bag. I think we got some burns, so I don't always count on that, but if you run across these fields, you don't have test strips, you still can come back. You might notice this nice downward trend with the sequentials as you have more and more applications and they're later in the season. That yield level is dropping. Again, we got tattooed. We got a lot of FIDO with that. Late season application, R4, R6, hotter temperatures. Even though we're trying to get those, okay, maybe a low 80-degree day in July, August, we can't always get that. The other part, you got to think about the physiology. But R6, are we putting on any other leaves? No, we're done. So if you get a burn, you can't recover. If you get a burn, let's say you get a burn at R2, you've got plenty of time for more leaf development. We're not. It's earlier in the season for the vast majority of time. Now, if you use this in a double crop scenario, I'm not going to give you the stamp of guarantee that you won't get a burn, okay? I'm thinking full season, first season crop. Makes sense with this shotgun? I'm going to start to tease this apart. And this is what's going on later in the season. This is September, guys, okay? So you've got the plot on the left. I'll break them out and make it a little easier. Plot on the left, untreated, no sulfur, senescing, it's dying, right? Plot on the right has 20 pounds of sulfur up front, okay? Leaf retention, chlorophyll content. What do you think is going on with those beans in September? They're still filling out. They're retaining pods for one and finishing filling it out. Beans on the left don't have the pod load, don't have the seed fill, okay? And that's coming into play. I'll go ahead and throw this. This is coming into play with the at-planting application, okay? A lot of people, there's a paper out that says we need to go later. Everything I'm seeing, we got to stack it up on the front side. It's for the nodulation, that fixation, that's coming into this, as well as the sulfur content, both of those nutrients, okay? Just some imagery to get to that same point, to the line. What's interesting also with this, Someone might say, boy, those look like horrible beans on the right. They're laying over. No, they're branched. We actually have branching going on. We're starting to continue with that. The early season deficiency or the lack of nitrogen, lack of sulfur, we didn't have the branching. Here's that point. So the plant on the left has one little branch, right? One's on the right. They have one going halfway up the plant and another one. So they're branching plus pod load, okay? Seed size. We do get into some node differences, 17, 18 on this set. So there's a lot of effects physiologically with this in this sulfur deficient field. Okay? Was that a question?
Yeah. How are you pinpointing that it's the sulfur response and not the ammonium response when you're using the AMS?
Yep.
I know you're putting it in a sulfur deficient soil, but how are you pinpointing that it's
Yeah, so that kind of is, it's coming over a course of a number of years. So the question is, how do we know it's a sulfur response, not just a nitrogen response or the combination from the fertilizer? So it's probably about 3 answers to that. We've got 10 or 12 different sources and some other studies that are coming up. Calcium sulfate, gypsum, they're seeing the response. Okay, so that's one. Another one is, think about it, is a planting date effect that's affecting mineralization and soil supply. I've got an April 25th planted, May 25th, a June 1st. So these kind of fields that we're still seeing the response flat out. I've got straight nitrogen sources in comparison. So urea, UAN in comparison. They're not showing the response. That's how I'm teasing that out. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, I like this.
The QR sheet,
Yep.
the sign sheet, it never made it.
Oh, all right, you're good.
Yeah, I get that.
Jake can get that. All right, let's keep on going. Yeah, I can't handle that one, Leslie. All right, so 2017, same kind of thing. Upwards of 13 bushel. Foliars were okay, and I already kind of alluded to that. Let's move on. So in 18, we started doing different sources, okay? And so here's just a smattering of them. We got untreated control, our ammonium sulfate, our MES-10, still using 20 pounds of sulfur as just kind of the base rate. And then we're bringing in gypsum, the pelletized gypsum, K-mag, ammonium thiosulfate, okay? That ATS, that was applied prior to emergence, just liquid application on the ground, right? So that's all that was. What was interesting and frustrating was this ATS, because, okay, maybe that's the one we're already going across the field. We're going to have some talks with the weed boys. Okay, how can we get this to work? Because there's some efficacy issues if we start tank mixing with glyphosate or something like that. But just try and think about what's the way to bring that in. Visually, the tailgate's the best way to show this one. We still had AMS and MES-10 were the two. Visually, height, node development early on. The gypsum, the K-mag. I mean, these are very soluble sources. So, I was pretty frustrated that I didn't see the visual response. So it goes back to his question about, well, maybe it is the nitrogen. But when we got to the end of the season, here's AMS and MES-10, 72, 73 bushel beans versus 62. The gypsum, 73 bushel beans as well. So, again, we're catching it. So we might have a little bit of a nitrogen effect on the height early on. But by the time we got to the end of the season, it all evened out, and we were still seeing a pretty good response. Okay, this is 2018. I haven't had a chance to throw 2019 together. You will notice the K-mag, the spray ATS, they were okay yields, but they were not a 10, 11 bushel yielder for us. I was anticipating they would, but right now I don't see it, at least on that site. I do have other locations where we've got the AMS and the ATS, the ammonium thiosulfate, in comparison field scale, and it looks pretty good. That the ATS does look good. So I'm trying to tease out why we have some cases where it does look good and some they don't. Yeah.
What was the incorporation?
None.
No incorporation?
No incorporation. Mother Nature, water works it in. These are no-till conditions. Okay. Great question. Again, these are dissolved fairly readily. Again, the MES-10 has half elemental. This Tiger, that's elemental sulfur, guys, right? And so again, did it oxidize? That's a nice talking point. 62 bushel beans to 65. Okay, maybe a little bit oxidized, but not what you need. I mean, oxidation of elemental sulfur, it's upward of 300 days, right? It's next year, basically, is when you get that benefit. Okay? So sources are starting to pull out. I'm still, if you're looking for a reference strip, ammonium sulfate's a nice one. If you want to play with MES's product, you could. Gypsum's right there. again, this K-Mag and the ATS, I was hopeful that those would be playing out. We'll see what the 2019 season looks like for us, and we'll go from there. Just to kind of just get back to some physiology of what's going on here, look at the roots. Look at the roots, and in particular, look at the nodules. This is September, I think the middle of September picture. I got the untreated control this time. It's on the right. Look at the root system and the nodule load. Does it kind of make sense why that plant was shutting down with a few slides ago, right? Yellowing up, senescing. It does not have a nitrogen supply. Look at the nodule load on the left. Just absolutely loaded up, okay? So sulfur, again, is needed as a cofactor. This is a nodulation effect, therefore a nitrogen effect, more through nodulation than probably the fertilizer. Okay, yeah?
Okay, so 100 bushel yield goal, how many pounds of nitrogen are we going to put through to make that 100 bushel yield?
So if you're looking at 100 bushel beans, how much is being removed basically is what you're asking? Or how much is in the overall plant?
Well, yeah, how much nitrogen do we need to make that 100 bushel?
So I'll answer the question in terms of 100 bushel beans are going to be on the order of 400 pounds of nitrogen when the overall plant itself and the beans themselves are together. By the end of the season, 350, 400 pounds.
Okay, now looking at sulfur through that lens, how much sulfur do we need to balance the nitrogen-sulfur ratio for that crop, knowing that we need 400 pounds of nitrogen?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So how much sulfur do you need to balance that? If you look at just straight nutrient removal rates, if we do that, we're looking at 100 bushel beans, that's 35 pounds of sulfur in the overall crop. We just said 350 pounds of nitrogen, that's a 10-to-1 ratio right there. I'm not saying that's the answer, I'm just saying that's how they break out. That's overall, that's stems, that's petioles, that's roots. I think what we need to get down to is what's the ratio in the leaves themselves, so then management and correction can occur.
And at 35, how much do we have to apply overall broadcast on the soil to get that 35 into those things?
How much of what?
That's all.
So at 35 pounds of sulfur, that's how much is in the overall plant and grain. I'm not saying that's the need. What we struggle with right now is having consistent higher yielding beans to have that answer. Because right now, a lot of the math is based on, okay, just extrapolating, right? It's just extrapolating, okay, we're assuming that 75, 80 bushel bean nutrient content is where we need to be at that same level at the 100. And that's extrapolation. Truth be told, it probably dilutes a little bit, and that we don't have as much of a concentration because we have better growth. So that 35 pounds of sulfur, it might be more like a 30 pound, but we don't have a strong enough data set to fully realize that.
35 is going through the crop.
Right now, when you use just the law of averages of soybean growth and development.
You make a broadcast application of sulfur, what percentage of what you put out broadcast on the field does that bean get? So how much more than 35 do you have to put to get 35?
I gotcha. It's a good question. How much? So if we were taking 35 pounds and you think about, okay, how much does that crop take up? How much is it actually taking up from the fertilizer? And how much more do you need to do? It goes back to, okay, what are your field conditions? How much is being supplied from the soil itself? And again, are we just talking 0 to 6, 0 to 8 inch soil sample, or do you have a good profile with this? I think the better part of this is getting to the point of improving nodulation and fixation, therefore nitrogen supply. I'm probably not going to get to a direct answer on how much sulfur, because I don't think we need that high of a fertilizer rate, flat out. In fact, I think, if we get up to a 35, 40 pounds of sulfur rate, like actual sulfur, I see some yields hurt. I actually have fields of those situations. So I guess to try to answer it in one way, let's not try to go beyond that. Let's just try to, okay, get what we need for the sulfur, for the nodulation, so then the roots can explore, get more access to more sulfur from mineralization, have more nodulation. That's how I'm going to answer it, and I want to switch to rate as he gives me a 5-minute talk. This is just a fancy, all right, nodules, no nodules. 5 minutes, we'll get this. This is a fancy way of saying, yes, that's right, Shaun. All right, Untreated control, ureides, that's what's associated with fixation. We just started getting into this in 2018. As we get into the sulfur sources, in particular, AMS have a higher ureide content, more fixation. So it just, I don't like counting nodules, I want some more concrete numbers. So it's just backing that up. That's all I'm getting at with that slide, okay? Organic matter rate, this is kind of getting to you. Let's go there. AMS, MES 10, Tiger AMS, let's blaze through that. Here's the point. Break points, if everything's perfect, 60 to 70 bushel beans over the course of a couple of years, all we needed was 10 pounds of sulfur at that yield level, okay? We need to have higher ones to see if this breaks even higher. Those MES 10, Tiger AMS, how much did it need? 20 pounds of sulfur. But when you really think about it, it was the same sulfate, 10 pounds of sulfur as sulfate. It was all that was needed. Now, is that the recommendation out of the gate right now? I like to have a little bit of a balance, a little bit of a buffer. So I go higher rates to still see if we have responsive sites, and then you can fine tune, okay? Higher yield levels definitely come into play, other sources. So breakpoint, 10 pounds of sulfur when everything's perfect and a soluble form. Foliar, because I want to get you guys some nuts and bolts. We did 1, 2, 4, 6 pounds of sulfur at foliar applications at V4 and R3. Okay, if we're doing this wait and see approach, take leaf samples, what does it look like? We do have a pre-AMS as a standard to compare to. Do we need 5 pounds of sulfur basically in a foliar spray to bring it back? The answer is no. It's more like 4 pounds. Okay, it's still high. It's still a high rate. Okay. That's at V4. R3, exact same curve. We got this in 2019, just again, haven't had time to process all of that. What's interesting, not sure if we got a little bit of FIDO or something, and this point right here is drawing me down. The sequential V4 R3 didn't play out in 2018. Curious what it'll do in 2019. So 4 pounds of sulfur, if you're doing the wait and see approach and bring it back, it still did not get to the yield level of a pre-AMS. So we were looking at 64 bushel beans. Pre-AMS was a 69 bushel bean crop, okay? So it still didn't get to that level. True to sulfur deficiency, situationally deficient. I've talked a lot about just the basics of sulfur supply, how you need it in soybeans, sulfur deficient field so we can learn from it. Here's one I'm able to get to, the flat blacks. So we're in West Lafayette, it's flat black, 4% organic matter, okay? And so we had early versus late, as early as we could in 2018, May 11th versus June 5th. We had 10 different nitrogen and sulfur treatments that come into play. And so, you know, getting into this, what kind of yield results? Again, get you a nice sense of how dark that soil is, right? That's what I'm talking about. May 11th. Applications, probably the best thing I'll do is just concentrate untreated control, AMS, so that's a pretty standard one I've been talking about all day today. 20 pounds of sulfur, you get 17.5 pounds of nitrogen, in case you haven't done that math yet. ATS, you get 20 pounds of sulfur, 9 pounds of nitrogen. And then we started to balance in some of the ureas, UAN. We even did some directed sprays, drop nozzles, those kind of things, spoon-fed with corn, all that coming into play. Okay? So, what was coming out of this? A planting date by sulfur interaction. In other words, May 11th, planting date, okay, high yielding, we're in the 60 to 70 range. June 5th, okay, we know that's a standard, okay, we're 60 bushel beans. But the interaction is the real fun one with this. We've got a set of nitrogen and sulfur. I'm not getting into the what's right now, it's a nitrogen and sulfur response. We're going from 62 bushel beans to 74, 75. We're talking 12, 14 bushel responses, okay? With those sources. A standard AMS, 69, 7 bushel, on flat blacks, on 4% organic matter soil. Okay. The AMS directed actually showed a pretty good response. Nothing, right? If you like all those little letters, E. No sulfur, no nitrogen response with a later planting. Okay. Early planting is where we're seeing it. All right, see if you pay attention. Why do you think we're seeing it early planting? Cool wet, right? Mineralization. That's kind of the next step to prove it. I mean, I've got weather data that backs that, but that's really what's going on, okay? I'm not going to get weather data. Proteins maintained, we're not a detriment with some of those applications except a UAN direct late season. Seed size, we are seeing an improvement. So 15.5, that's basically just shy of 2,800 seeds per pound. Okay, we are bumping seed size with these applications as well. Okay, and the fancy way of getting to it, are we having an effect on nodulation and nitrogen fixation? You betcha. We are having a major effect. Here's your ag content, lower number versus higher number, we got more fixation on the flat blacks. These situations. I want to end early planting still there. Fertility on the early planting. Let's go. We're doing field scale. Here's one with a cover crop. I'll end on probably in 2 slides. This had 24 pounds, so 100-pound AMS rate. This is a 60-acre field, 80-foot swaths back and forth, 12 reps, right? Had cereal rye burned down at knee high, not chest high, knee high, and then planted into brown. And this is the middle of August kind of shot. We were 18.5 nodes with that plant versus 16.5. This is on, it's a silt clay loam, silty clay, about 3% organic matter. Okay, so not as beautiful as that table, but still healthy enough. We're 11 bushel response across the field, not small plots. Okay, there are these situations that are popping. Okay, so concluding thoughts: soil test, maybe. Soybean is the integrator. So if you're looking for these responses, late spring application, 20 pounds of sulfur is a nice starting point just to see if you've got a responsive field. AMS is a pretty good product to get into. Some of these other ones I think could play out. I have a little mixed bag with ATS right now. Critical levels, if you get close to 0.25%, nitrogen to sulfur ratio with the leaves 18:1 or higher, you're probably going to have a field that's going to be responsive. If you're doing a foliar, 4 pounds of sulfur. And then start putting the pieces together of how sulfur becomes available. Mineralization, cool wet soils, high carbon content, right? To see about these situations of the wins and the whys. All right, thank you.
So